All right. Uh, God has told me to talk about fear until I'm no longer afraid. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be talking about fear. I'll be talking about my fear, my experiences with fear, why fear and anxiety comes up for me today, and the different kind of strategies and mindset shifts that I've used to overcome fear, anxiety to some degree, or at least to be able to act regardless of the fear. I don't know. I just want I just want to remind myself to talk like I'm talking to a friend. So it's kind of roboticness, right? Like just trying to explain fear to a friend. I think when it comes to the most important things that I want to do in my life, I feel a lot of fear. And I think that's natural. Something I was thinking about earlier was this idea that if you're afraid to do something, then that's probably a good sign that that something means a lot to you. That something that you're afraid to do is important to you because you're worried about the outcome. You're worried about how it will turn out. And so fear is a very natural response to the things that are most important to us. Anxiety and worry are a very natural response to the things that worry us most. And for myself, a lot of my fear and my anxiety and my worry, it centers around my writing and my videos, my ideas, philosophy, my intelligence, my ability to speak. Because all of these things are connected to what's most important for me in my life to do, which is to think deeply about the things which are important to me and try to express that to people in a way that engages them in that thought as well. And I want to be successful at it, right? I want to be successful I want to have a lot of viewers. I want to have a lot of people who are engaging with my thoughts. I want a lot of people who walk away from my content being, materially impacted by that content. And so I'm afraid. I'm afraid when I write and I'm afraid when I record and I'm afraid when I philosophize. I'm afraid when I try to express my ideas like I am right now. Right this very moment, I have a certain low grade amount of anxiety about how it is that I'm doing, what it is that I'm saying, how I'm saying it, whether my point is getting across, whether this would be something that people would be interested in. And almost as soon as you start trying to create anything that is of importance to you. Once you try to start to do anything that is important to you, I think that fear comes up in the form of those nagging questions in the form of, am I good enough? Am I good enough to be a writer? Am I good enough to be a philosopher? Am I good enough to be a speaker? Am I good enough to be an intellectual? Am I good enough to be persuasive? Am I good enough to get people to think deeply about the things that I'm talking about? And the problem with asking all of those questions, especially from the beginning, is that you don't have any idea about whether or not you're good enough because you have no experience with it. You have no experience actually doing it, and you have no experience trying to perfect it, and you have no experience in putting it out there to be looked at and criticized by people. You don't have a history with which to really analyze whether or not what you're doing is any good. And it feels wrong to sort of personally or subjectively evaluate yourself because you know that you might be liable to making yourself seem better than you really are. At the same time, it's really difficult to compare yourself to other people and get an idea of whether you're good enough that way because all the successful people are successful. They've already gone through all the things that they need to do to make their work compelling and you haven't gotten there yet. And so you're comparing your baseline to somebody's curated work, right? The best of the best. And that's a very high standard to compare oneself to, even if even if you are, decently talented, even if you have a lot of potential, it's really difficult to compare yourself to somebody who to compare yourself to somebody's curated kind of work that's come out of hours and hours and hours and hours of practice on top of editing and everything else that goes into a polished work. And even someone like myself who has produced a relative amount of work but hasn't really put in the effort to edit it or curate it because I wasn't interested in a long time for actually sharing it with people. Even for someone like myself, trying to compare myself to people's polished work, it's it's really putting up yourself up against a very high standard. And then you're also different from that successful person that you're comparing yourself to. You have an individual kind of style. You have an individual kind of voice. You have an individual message that you're trying to get out there. You're trying to do something different and unique with your own work if you're in this kind of creative sphere. And so naturally, what you're doing, what you're going after, and how you're doing it is going to be different and perhaps even significantly different from a lot of the people who are already successful or from even other people engaged in creative works who are around you, friends or colleagues. So it's really hard to compare yourself to other people accurately as to whether or not you're having success. And it's not even a clear standard for success itself because we know that some of the most important writers, some of the most important artists, some of the most important philosophers, some of the most important creatives were not considered well known or successful in their lifetimes and didn't consider themselves to be successful or even good in their lifetimes. It was only years later that the work was discovered and appreciated by the right people at the right time. And so even trying to say that my work is good if a lot of people appreciate it is sort of a flimsy standard. Even if it were something that you ought to compare yourself to. And so I think really because of this weakness of evaluation and a weakness over what the actual standard is for good work when it comes to these intellectual and creative realms that isn't just sort of arbitrarily made up by academics. It's hard to get a sense of the quality of your work. It's hard to get a sense of how valuable it is going to be in the long run. And it's hard to get an assessment of your own innate capacities. It's hard to get an assessment of your own creative potential. At the same time, we all know that you can't write if you never write. You can't record yourself speaking if you never speak. You certainly cannot be successful creatively or with the things that matter to you the most if you never do them over and over and over again. If you don't invest the time and the labor into whatever your craft is. If I don't invest in reading and writing and thinking and recording and trying to clarify my own ideas and trying to develop my own philosophy and trying to do all the kinds of things that are involved in my work, I know for a fact that I won't be successful, regardless of any innate potential, because any innate potential is dead on arrival without action. And this applies to me, but I think it really just applies to any kind of creative pursuit. Now, philosophical writing is not necessarily creative writing, but there's a sense of art in it, and especially when you're writing in my sort of philosophical tradition, which is more a literary philosophy, you might say, there is a certain sense of artistry or creativity when it comes there, and there's certainly an intellectual creativity in trying to piece together your own philosophy of life. But the creative person and myself, we have this problem, and the problem is we have no idea if we have what it takes to be successful from the get go. And we won't know that in any to any modicum of degree until we've invested hours and hours and weeks and years in our kind of craft. Only once you've made this massive investment in it can and you really start putting it somewhere where people can see it. And you know that you've actually put your full effort into it. Only then can you get a sort of judgment on whether or not your work is good. And all those things can get in the way. If you're not putting in the time to actually improve your craft, then it's certainly whatever potential you have is certainly not going to come out. If you are unable to get any feedback on it, if you're unable to get if you're unable to put your work in a place where people are going to be able to see it, read it, hear it, and criticize it, you're never going to get any kind of feedback. And so, I think a lot of a lot of creatives, a lot of writers, a lot of intellectuals, they suffer from a problem of low visibility, you might say, and that low visibility hampers their ability to get an assessment on the quality of what they're doing and whether it's actually impacting people, whether or not it's actually making a difference in the way that they've wanted it to make a difference. And then even if you have the practice and even if you have the visibility, you might not be using your talent to its full extent. You might not be putting in the real effort to make whatever it is that you're creating as best as you can. You're not really polishing it, right? You kind of just, for me, this is writing an essay and all my essays being a first draft, never really a second draft, never really a second take on videos. I almost never do a second take on videos. And for me at this stage, there's an important reason to that. A lot of this it's about overcoming fear. It's about just getting the repetitions in and trying each time and to focus on the quality a little bit. But because at the beginning, it's really about getting in the hours more than it is about trying to perfect it. But at some stage, I'm going to have to, invest the time in perfecting it. And so it's only after you spent the time building the skill and you've gotten a certain degree of visibility and you've put in the work to polish it that you could really get an accurate assumption or accurate assessment as to whether or not your work is meaningful to anybody else besides yourself, and whether or not the goal of your work has been accomplished or not. And then even then, it might just be that the world wasn't ready for it, that you just didn't hit your right crowd. I mean, again, there are these artists and thinkers and intellectuals who have had that exact kind of experience. Now you have to do all those things, I think, in order to really get the best chance. But I guess the point that I'm trying to underline here is that so much of the creative life is this inherent constant risk. It's an inherent constant risk because it's the it's the fear in the back of your mind that you are going to put in all the effort. You're going to put in all the work. You're going to dedicate the hours and the time. You're going to take the brunt of the social criticism. You're going to put all your fears aside. You're going to put all your doubts aside. You're going to put all the worries aside, and you're going to focus on your task, on your project, on your creative thing, right? And at the end of all that, after the end of all that time, all that effort, all that energy, all that anxiety, all that fear, all the things you had all the things you had to give up for the sake of your work. And at the end of all of that, nobody's going to care. And the work that you've done is not going to matter to anyone but yourself. And that everything that you've done is going to be meaningless at best, if not actively ridiculed and actively criticized and actively panned. Because that is also a real risk of being a creative person is that you do all of this, you take the risks, you put in the time, you try to make it as good as possible, you you put yourself on the line and you sacrifice for your work and it doesn't amount to anything in anybody else's eyes. Or worse, it's ruthlessly criticized. And so there's inherent risk to any kind of creative work, including intellectually creative work. You fear failure, and not just failure, but you fear failure at the end of a long journey of cost, a long journey of effort and time and sacrifice. You fear it's going to all end up not mattering. And that's what stops you from starting. It's what stops you from starting, or it's what places that hesitation throughout your day as you're doing your work. It it's that little thing in the back of your mind that makes you want to avoid the work, that makes you want to avoid getting started, or makes you want to avoid being consistent. You think it's not even worth it. Why even try? Why even try? And maybe I can get myself to do it here or there every once in a while, or only when I'm motivated, but I can't get myself to be consistent with it. Because if I'm consistent with it, then I'm gonna have to test it. That's the fear. I'm gonna have to test it. Someday, if I go down that path, I'm gonna know the value of my work. And it may not be what I thought it was gonna be. It may not live up to my expectations. It may not live up to my desires, but there's gonna be a judgment. There is gonna be a judgment handed down on my work by the crowd, by the world, or by the experts, and I won't be able to avoid it. I won't be able to avoid the judgment. I won't be able to avoid the analysis given by other people on my work. And what if it turns out I'm not as good as I hoped to be, as I wanted to be? They're afraid that their sense of self, I'm afraid that my sense of self, I'm afraid that my sense of meaning, I'm afraid that my intelligence, my creativity, my philosophy, my writing is gonna be judged, and people are going to come back and say this wasn't good. This wasn't good. This was a pretentious waste of time. I fear the judgment by people written in stone. And it's true that it could come back positive and not negative. It's true that it could have a wonderful impact instead of having uh, a bad impact. It could be appreciated instead of ridicule, but there's that sense of, do I want to take the risk, right? Do I want to take the risk to try to do the thing that is meaningful to me, to try to do the thing that fills my life with purpose in so many ways? It's not the only thing, but it's a very big part of who I am. Do I want to risk that in the judgment of the world? But the answer to that question is it's so clear, it's so simple. And you know how I know it's so clear and it's so simple because if my child was in front of me and said, or a kid or a kid was in front of me and they asked me, hey dad, should I take the risk to live a meaningful life? Should I take the risk to live out my purpose in this world, even if it ends in failure, even if it ends in catastrophe, even if it ends with the whole world laughing at me? Should I take the risk? And I would say, absolutely. Absolutely, you should do it. And if he asked me why, I would say, because if you don't, your life is just going to be one day after another of regret. It's going to be one moment after the another of what if. You're going to live a life that is empty, that is detached, that is drifting, and that constantly tries to fill a hole, because God gave you a purpose. God gave you a desire. God gave you a meaning in life. God gave you a drive towards something in this life, which is not always the case. God doesn't give that to everybody. God doesn't give that single-minded purpose to everybody. God doesn't give the desire to be great to everybody. And he gave it to you. And if you have that in you, you have to take the risk. You have to take the risk, because if you don't, you will regret it for the rest of your life. You will regret it for the rest of your life. And it will drive you insane. And even more than that, the people in this world deserve what you're doing. The people of this world deserve you taking a risk on your dreams because your dreams are not gonna just impact you, they're gonna impact the world around you. If your dreams are successful, you might change the world completely. You might just change one person's life completely. You can't know the impact of your work before you've done it, and you can't know what you're capable of before you've tried, before you've really tried. Absolutely take risks. Absolutely. There's nothing else for you to do. It doesn't mean it's the only thing that should matter in life. There are other things that matter in life, like family and like Jesus and God and your relationship with them. But if God has given you that gift, do not ignore it. Do not put it off. Do not be afraid. That's what I would tell him. That's what I would tell him. And that's what you have to tell yourself because that's the truth. I can't give this up. I can't give it up because I would go crazy without it. I can't give it up because this is where my life's meaning and my life purpose comes from. I can't give it up because there's not really anything else I'd rather do than this.